screening with trees. How many people are interested in, are here because they want to do some planting with, for screening, or just have an interest in it? Okay. So this is a topic I've been wanting to do for a long time. And it all stems from the popularity of just a few species of trees that are being used repetitively, almost to a level that is like we're using like skip laurels, okay? They're being way overplanted, okay? It's a good plant, it really is. But I'm watching them go out of the store by the dozen, okay? And one of the things that I learned early on when I was, developing my skills was that diversity of species is a very important concept in landscape design. So many of you know my background is in an arboriculture. I'm an arborist, right? I started as a tree climber and pest management, things like that. And when I had a chance to open a garden center, I thought it was like a sign, because a lot of the problems I deal with as an arborist stem from improper planting, whether it's not planting the right tree in the right location, also planting too deep, that's a big problem, all right? And what happens, these trees, instead of living 40, 50, 60 years and beyond, are living 5, 7, 10 years. So, does anybody want to take a guess at how long the life expectancy of a tree in New York City is? Anybody got a guess? 17 years. They're only expected to live 17 years in New York City, and they just finished planting millions of trees, and they're already doing replacements because the planting procedures were not enforced, So anyway, through that process of learning, I decided to open a garden center. And then over the past few years, I've really started to notice that, wow, I am buying a lot of skip laurels, and I am buying a lot of green giant arborvitaes. So what are some of the other screening trees you guys are using at your properties? Anybody? Yews are a great example. And you know what? I forgot to write that down. Yews aren't being used enough. Primary reason is deer, okay? Yews are deer fodder. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. So deer have actually changed our landscapes, all right? Because things we were planting 10 years ago are now food for the deer. And this is where a lot of my concerns rise. Like what happens if deer start eating skip laurels, okay? Like I practiced in Westchester for many years. And in Westchester, they eat rhododendrons. Ooh. Down here, they haven't really gone after them yet. There's no nutritional value in a rhododendron for deer. They eat them because they just have to fill their stomach. Hey, Jordan, how you doing, brother? They just want to fill their stomach. So sometimes they just eat because they have to fill that void, So think about that at your homes. Like, what if they start eating Western Arborvitaes, right? So we don't know what's going to happen with that. So this is why diversity of species becomes very important. So let me just get kind of a rough idea. So has anybody here done any screening planting personally? Yeah. And what type of trees did you do? What did you end up using? I did some plantings for you, didn't I?
Yeah, we did the cherry tree, but the original landscape we did the giant arborvitaes.
Okay. All right. So like contractors that are planting trees on homes, whether they renovated or are developing a new home. I had one this morning, right? And they just needed another 20 arborvitaes, And we're going to be able to help him with that. But there's not much thought going into that design. And it's really a formula for a very big expense down the road when tree replacement is a major expense, right? So one of the things we try to do here is educate you guys on how to care for them and keep them healthy. And because replacement costs are out of line compared to maintenance costs. So maintenance is good if it saves you money, right? So, anybody else have some plants that they've used? Anybody using skip laurels? No? Okay. Do you use, like, how many do you have? approximately?
About 2 months ago, we planted 6 in a row.
Okay, all right, well, that's good. Now, I'm not saying that any of these trees should not be used, so please don't hear that, okay? What I'm going to try to get you to look at today is maybe trying some different things or some alternative ways of planting. So I brought my whiteboard here, and you know, very often, and I'll take some scenarios from you guys in a little bit, but very often, like at the back of the property, somebody wants to block out their neighbors, okay? And the question I get when they come in is, where are the skip laurels? It's like clockwork, right? And we try to get them talking to us a little bit. And I ask them if they'll be receptive to some other ideas, you know? And then I qualify. It's like, listen, if you're locked into just doing a monoculture, does that term sound familiar? Planting all of one species. If you're locked into that, I'm not going to debate it, right? If that's what somebody wants. But I'll just ask them briefly. I said, listen, if I can show you a way to do a more naturalized, aesthetically appealing planting, would you be interested? You know? So sometimes yes, sometimes no. We get both, right? So I've got to say, this year, people have been much more receptive to mixing it up a little bit, right? And what I'm seeing is a lot more pleasure, you know, because there's a couple things that come out of that. Is they save money, right? We can get the cost down. And I feel it looks like it's been there forever. So, all right, so we have a house at the back of our property. Neighbor's house, right? You can see that. And maybe they have a pool and a recreation area off to the side, okay? So, can you guys see that, right? And that backs up to your property, okay? So with a monoculture, right, let's say it's about 50 feet. All right, we can do the math. We take skip laurels. So here's another concept, spacing, right? Spacing. We'll get into this a little bit more. But I'm just going to use my spacing for skip laurels, which is like 8 feet, okay? So we have 50 feet divided by 8. Somebody, Tim, you're good at that. 6, right? And then you need an extra one on the end, so 7 skip laurels, right? 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 skip laurels, right? So what I want to try to get them to do is say, listen, instead of doing that, why don't we do some skip laurels over here where we don't need as much height, right? So this is what we're trying to block, is the house and the pool. So cryptomeria, right? So I give you a list of some other trees. So cryptomeria is becoming quite popular as an alternative to Western Arborvitaes or to the green giants. I also make note in the handout about alternative Western Arborvitaes, Excelsa, Steeplechase. There's a couple others out there and I'm drawing a blank, but they don't get as wide, okay? They're more manageable. We can keep the width of them under control. So what I would recommend is just doing 3 of them in a line to take that house out. This is where I blow their minds. How about not using an evergreen and using a flowering tree to provide a big, massive screening, right? So their pool is over here. So why don't we use a cherry tree that has a canopy that's much larger than an evergreen? Okay, so this is the premise of what I'm going to talk about a little bit. So deciduous goes out the window right away because they feel they have to have that year-round screening. Where a cherry tree, which means a plum tree, Yoshino, a Kwanzaa, we have a new one, a Royal Burgundy, gives you a lot more coverage for the same cost as one evergreen, okay? So instead of doing 3 more evergreens to finish off the screening, use a single cherry, dogwood, redbud, Stewardia, like the list goes forever. So trees with a single stem, right? Where the canopy is up higher, so you're getting that height and you're getting the breadth. But what do I do in the winter? Well, that's their pool, right? So it's less likely they're going to be out there in the winter. The other mention I have with that is those branches actually give you a distraction, okay? It's not like nothing's there. There's still quite a bit of distraction, all right? And that's your screening, all right? The other thing we talk about very often is as soon as you place anything there, okay, just a nice simple planting, where is your eye going to carry? It's going to carry to the new plants. It doesn't go beyond. Can you see beyond them? Yes, you can, right? But you tend not to, right? So that distraction is very valuable. We do have people come in with property line disputes and neighbors that aren't getting along, and you can see the emotion, right? So never don't spend money when you're emotional, okay? Don't buy trees when you're emotional, all right? It's not gonna work. It's not gonna work in your favor, okay? Right? And whether it's here or any place. You know, sometimes then it's still, the monoculture doesn't apply. You just have to break it up. So we're doing one this coming week. So we tried that. We said, hey, listen, let's diversify a little bit. And all we did was just 5 skip laurels, where we don't need the screening, and 5 cryptomeria. I said, we have room for one more tree in there. Why don't we use something gold, something blue? You know, I couldn't quite push it to deciduous, but, you know, she decided she was going to try a couple of different evergreens. And she liked the idea, and I like it because it's not a monoculture, right? So it's a good balance. It's a good compromise, if you will. So, and it's a start, right? So, how do you guys feel about that? Does that make sense to you? Or is anybody just like, no, that's not going to work for me with the deciduous tree? Does anybody see an objection on that? Go ahead.
Well, you shared that is depending on where your land is. Is it
I'm
by
sorry, I'm having a hard
your
time.
land? Where is it? Is it by sea? Is it by
Yeah, right. So,
foresting or other trees that are going to provide too much shade for that tree? The soil,
yeah.
that would be the limiting factor, I would also say.
That'll come into play, right? So on your selection. So all I want to do is just get you understanding why I'm doing this today, right? So there is not a cookie cutter approach to screening, right? So she's bringing up the point that different scenarios are going to require different types of trees. And that couldn't be more accurate. There is not one design that fits all projects, okay? So with the soils, right? So I'm dealing with like a conventional, typical house in a neighborhood. So a lot of us live near the water, right? And we want to maintain that view. So very often we'll use trees to frame that view, okay? Like at your property, I think we've talked about that, even in the back. Like you can use, so if you have the water out here, right? And then the view from the house is on an angle. You want to keep that water view as wide open as possible. So you might use shorter trees, but more than likely you're not trying to block the water view. Soil definitely comes into play. But one of the things on Long Island that's pretty consistent is soil structure, right? There's exceptions to it. So when you get closer and closer to the water, you tend to have sandier soils. You're probably dealing with a lot of rocky soils over there. That can all be addressed in proper planting. So I'm not going to talk a lot about planting today, but you can. There are going to be exceptions, like cultural exceptions, like I'm trying to think of something that, like junipers. Junipers are very nice screening trees. The native juniper is deer fodder, so you need to be aware of that before I go too much further with it. But junipers have to have a lot of sun. They can also tolerate almost any soil condition. They can tolerate rocky, sandy soil. They can tolerate heavy clay, okay? And just for the record, Long Island does not have heavy clay. I hear that so often here. Heavy clay is when you walk on it and it's wet and you get taller because the clay builds up under your feet. That's heavy clay. That's like down in the Delmarva Peninsula. That's where clay is really clay. But we do have a lot of compacted conditions and disturbed soils, right? So all of that has to be corrected at the time of planting, okay? So of course you have light comes into play. One of the big challenges we have is planting, screening in low light areas, okay? So one of the things I would like you guys to all consider today, like if you are thinking about screening, we always ask about light. Do you have enough sun to do green giants, junipers, right? Skip laurels have become popular because they can tolerate low light, right? Does everybody know that?
No.
That's how. So the planting screening in the shade has evolved over the past 30 years. About 30 years ago, it was hemlocks, okay? Does anybody remember hemlocks? Okay? Hemlocks are a beautiful tree, okay? They're a native tree. They were compromised by an insect, the woolly adelgid, which was introduced into our country. So when I got into tree care, we didn't know how to control woolly adelgid. We had just said, well, they're all going to die. We don't know what to do. And then through research, what we've learned is the entire life cycle. So if there is no reason not to do hemlocks unless you have deer, okay? If you don't have deer and can plant hemlocks, they are a fabulous tree in part sun, full shade. They'll tolerate it, okay? But we moved away from hemlocks about 20 years ago, and we went to the Arborvitaes. Everybody thought, well, if you have just a little sun, they'll tolerate that. Everybody knows what happened to them, right? They just fell apart. They were not good quality trees. So the snow would come and they would splay out. So the emerald, those pillar Arborvitaes, the what are they called? Nigras. It's called a black Arborvitae was the common name. They were just junk. Actually, the big hedges off the back of this building are black Arborvitae, like they're the Nigra Arborvitaes. And they're horrible. I don't know how they're still standing. We have to put them back together every year. But, so they didn't last, right? And then what eventually happened is everybody moved to the skip laurels. So skip laurels are a very good plant for low light conditions. Is anybody considering a project in low light? Okay, because I'm going to talk about that for a second. Some of the other nice alternatives to skip laurels are the Japanese hollies. And we're going to take time to show these to you. I couldn't drag you guys outside today. I'm sorry. I was going to have all these trees in a setting where you could see them. We were going to set them up, but just didn't work out with the weather. So Japanese hollies, you guys know them, right? So what's the first thing you think of with hollies? Spiny leaves, right?
Yes.
I don't want spiny leaves. No, you have to see these. They're very elegant. Japanese hollies are a beautiful, beautiful tree. And there's several varieties of them. You know, Chesapeake, Steed, Schwabel, and they all have a similar culture. And they'll tolerate the low light conditions. They can also take quite a bit of sun, okay? Not all day sun, but they can tolerate quite a bit of sun. So mixing Portuguese or skip laurels with Japanese hollies and Portuguese laurels, okay? So Portuguese laurel is it's in the same family as the skip laurel, but it has a little more color to it, some reds in the foliage and the petioles, and a different texture. So it's another way to diversify, okay? And currently deer are not touching any of those. Yes, Tim?
What about the Andromedas and the mountain laurels?
That's great, okay? And I do make note on your handouts about the ericaceous plants. Ericaceous plants are rhododendrons, Andromedas, azaleas fall in there, Leucothaway, but the real popular one right now is Andromeda. So I have cornered the market on Andromeda. When you go out to our nursery yard, you're going to see a big block of Andromeda. Why? Because the deer will not touch them. Okay, now the problem with them for screening is they don't get big enough fast enough. That's the primary reason people don't use them. One of the notes I've given you is consider them as a way to diversify your structural components. So you're using those laurels and Japanese hollies, mix Andromedas and rhododendrons in with them, in between them, in front of them, okay? So that's another way to diversify a screening planting. You don't have to do it all at one time, but if you are, like if your primary focus is to get some screening for your backyard this year or for your patio, get those components in place and then consider doing some other flowering pieces in front of it. And that's going to provide a lot of aesthetic benefits to you. Are we in agreement on that? You guys can all visualize that? Let's go. I want to go back to light a little bit. Because what I get is I'm like, I have full shade. I'm like, okay, so does the sun get there at all? Yeah, no, I get some sun, but it's full shade. And it's because when they get home from work, it's in dark shade, right? If they take a look at it at different parts of the day, you may actually find that you get 2-3 hours of sun. That's almost ideal, right? Like if you're getting part sun and part shade, you can plant almost anything. Like Arborvitaes, Western Arborvitaes, can tolerate 3-4 hours of sunlight, all right? The trees are much more forgiving when it comes to sunlight than perennials, okay? They will adapt, right? They'll kind of grow in a way that suits their needs in a low light condition. Now, if you have full shade, day up to day, sun up, sun down, and it's in the shade, you're going to have to get a little creative. There are plants to use in the shade. Nandina, Mahonia, privet will grow in the shade, okay? Viburnums grow in the shade. So privet and viburnums are deciduous plants, okay? They're going to drop their leaves. So we've all been to the Hamptons. Anybody drive Gin Lane in Southampton? Far as you can see. Real quick story. I got relocated to Southampton, okay? And I was from Westchester. So in Westchester, trees grow 80, 90, 100 foot tall. So for a tree guy, that's great. Big trees, right? Lots of work to do. Get relocated to the Hamptons, and I get to my office, I have 2 bucket trucks. There's not a single tree over 40 foot. I'm like, what do we do with the bucket trucks? They said, we prune privet. That's all they do with the bucket trucks. You just prune privet all day with bucket trucks. So the privet is a very functional plant for screening, okay? It's been used for decades as screening because the branching is so dense. Now, what throws people is, and I have some big privet here. When you first plant them, they're very sparse. They're a basal growth. All the growth comes off the base. So they need a few years to establish that, to get the screening. So like those hedges on the estates out east, those hedges are 40, 50 years old, if not more. Some are probably close to 100 years. So you have to be a little bit patient with some of the deciduous plants to get them started, okay? So is everybody with me so far? So we talked about shade. Did I talk enough about like growing conditions, or if anybody has any questions on that? But those are all things we can address at the time of planting, right? So that's one of the reasons we go to the property, okay? So let me see what I have here on my notes. So what are some of the other trees that aren't being used that should be considered? So we talked about cryptomeria. We have a line of trees out here off the pottery room. After we're done today, I hope you guys will take a few minutes. I'll show them to you. Leyland cypress. Does anybody remember the Leyland cypress? So it's kind of fallen to the wayside. Yes?
In Europe, they use a lot of beech.
A lot of what?
Beech. beech trees?
Beech, oh, Fagus, yeah.
Yeah.
Beech, like, yeah, no, it's a native tree, not native, but a naturalized tree here.
Yeah.
So there are stands, like if you have wooded areas on your property, more than likely it consists, so we have the American beech as naturalized on Long Island in the wooded areas. There's a lot of concerns with the health of the beech. It's a great tree. One of the most interesting hedges I have ever seen is a beech hedge. There's an arboretum and they do like 20 different types of hedges. So you can literally hedge any plant. Beech trees do very well here. They can be planted as a hedge. It would look like a privet hedge, you know, in a lot of ways because it loses its leaves. But is that your question on it? If it can be used for screening? Yeah.
And if they do it here.
Like, and if you have a wooded area, like I'm doing one in Miller Place right now, it's a heavily oak forest, but a neighbor took everything down. Does that sound familiar to anybody? Okay. So what we want to do is actually restore the hardwoods for screening, and you know, those trunks, they give you some screening. They give you a distraction and they deflect your view. Then we're mixing evergreens in with them. Yes, sir.
Is there a problem with beech? I have a property that it's very wooded and it has beech trees and oak. And the beech trees are all dying right now.
Beech trees are struggling right now because of a pathogen. Okay? Might be a little political statement here, arboricultural politics, but so there's a lot of studies being done on those right now. The first set of information that comes out, I never try to put much merit into it. There's a pathogen that gets into the roots through the soil. It's a soil-borne nematode, okay? And it gets in and it blocks the vascular tissue. So that's why the leaves are scorching, okay? The cure is worse than the cause. Right now, the treatment has skull and crossbones on the label, okay? So personally, I'm not using it, okay, for that reason. Nature has a funny way of correcting things. And that's why monocultures are a concern to me, okay? Who has purple plums? Anybody? How's it doing? Dying from the black knot. Okay. 25, 30 years ago, purple plums hit the market with a rage of interest because it had burgundy foliage. They are a beautiful, beautiful tree. The growers couldn't keep up with the demands. So they're pumping them out. Asexual reproduction. Very similar to what happened to the impatiens. Okay? Just poor propagation techniques. But they pop them out and they put them into the landscapes, you know, via the garden centers. And a lot of those older purple plums now have black knot fungus. And it's not one or two, and it's not dozens, it's all of them, okay? Almost every one of them has black knot on it. And it's a very unsightly canker that forms on the branches. So I believe it occurred because the perfect storm happened. The pathogen was prevalent. The trees became stressed from drought and climatic conditions. We've had some very extreme climatic conditions the past 5-7 years. And then if rain comes at the ideal time, the infection occurs. That pathogen has been festering for several years. So most of the plums I'm seeing, they have had black knot for at least 3 to 5 years. So the infection happened a long time ago, but the galls get bigger, they spread, and the trees become unsightly. Okay, and I'm telling you this because this is how nature corrects monocultures. Okay? So if we continue down the path with skip laurels, so what are the pests that skip laurel get now? Shotgun fungus is the big one. Won't kill the plant, but it'll make them so ugly you rip them out. Okay? Black vine weevil is a pest. It's a pest that belongs here. Its populations will go up and down with nature. But skip laurels are going to get some type of a canker or some kind of a pathogen that kills them and puts balance back into nature. Nature is very, very powerful. And big with stories now. I must be getting old, okay? But when I started in our industry, it was a time when you got hired to spray pesticides, okay? And it was all before silent spraying. And we used to go to properties and just rifle pesticides. You would be covered in them at the end of the day. And they were organophosphates, carcinogenic. And these properties had no butterflies, no bees, no birds, no squirrels, no fox, no nothing. Sterile, just as disgusting as could be. At that time, I was in the right place at the right time. The industry said, hey, this cannot be good, right? So we changed our methods of caring for pests. It became integrated pest management. And I was in the perfect place at the right time. I went back to school. I studied plant pathology, and we stopped using pesticides, right? It's another reason I opened Deckers, is so that people have an alternative to get proper products without relying on heavy pesticides, okay? So, and within 2-3 years, the birds returned, the squirrels returned, everything kind of moved back towards where it's supposed to be. And it was a lesson I've never forgotten. I share it a lot, because when I hear about all the damage we're doing, and we are doing damage, nature has a tendency to correct itself, okay? And all through these bad things we're doing, we're trying to change the way so that we're not doing the damage. Well, preventing monocultures is a way to make a difference, okay? Because if we keep going on the path of these big long hedges of just one species, something's going to put it back in balance. It doesn't fail. I don't know when. I'll probably be out of business by the time it occurs, but we have to think, future generations and stuff like that, okay? If you don't want to think about that, just think about the economics on it. You got to pay to put them all back in, okay? So maybe you lose 3 plants to a pathogen. You can replace, right? But you're not replacing 24 of them, okay? So, did I answer your question, Tim? What did you ask me before? Yeah, okay. Oh, about the Andromeda, yeah. So, listen, take a look at the Andromeda. They're magnificent, okay? Up in Eaton's Neck. I'm like, okay, I want to help those people out. They're so disgusted. They can't get anything to grow because of the deer. But Andromeda and boxwoods are 100%. There are plenty of other deer resistant, but boxwood and Andromeda are 100%. Will not touch them. Just have not seen it fail.
But the boxwoods also had a problem, didn't they? The English boxwood?
So boxwood blight, right? So I haven't seen it.
Yeah, I have.
You have? Okay.
Well, I don't have names.
So okay. So boxwoods get plenty of diseases, right? The big one right now in the press is boxwood blight, and it's a pathogen. So the growers are being held to very high standards if they grow boxwoods. It's correcting it. If you have boxwoods that are in decline, it's not necessarily boxwood blight. Okay, there's actually some treatments coming out, soil treatments to control them. But like if you have half a boxwood turning orange and yellow and then dying, that could be a couple of different things. It's not necessarily boxwood blight. Problem is none of them are treatable. Okay, so if you see one of my mentors told me, he said, listen, if a boxwood's failing, let it go. Don't put the time and the money and the sprays into it. It's just not worth it. It's going to continue to go. You can buy time by pruning infected portions out. Sound familiar? Yeah. Keep the plants healthy. Keep your plants healthy. They won't get the pathogens, okay? Insects and diseases are symptoms of an unhealthy plant. They're not the cause of an unhealthy plant, okay? So if you have insects on your skip laurels, they get scale, by the way, also. And you'll see that on the stems and the branches. There's something out of balance, okay? Could be drought, could be fertility, could be improper pruning, could be a lot of different things. By the way, while I'm on that, improper pruning will facilitate insect infestations. Anybody that attended the pruning seminar may remember that. That's why we don't shear everything, because you tend to get scale insects. So, okay.
Leyland site, you touched on the Leyland site, because I have about 4 or 5 about 20-something years old. They're just totally woody on the bottom.
Okay.
You know, people say you prune them, we're not supposed to prune them. I mean, they're really tall, but they're up against the fence also, so I don't know if that has something to do with it.
Is the dieback on the back side or?
All around.
Okay,
Yeah,
all right.
just,
All right, so in the south, Leyland cypress get a canker disease. So I haven't seen it yet. It doesn't mean it's not here. I have other tree guys saying, yes, it's here. It's called ceridium canker. So Leyland cypress were headed in that direction where they were getting overplanted. Actually, when I opened Leyland cypress, we used to sell dozens of Leyland cypress. You should usually try to plant Leyland cypress as balled and burlapped, and you don't plant real big ones, okay? They don't transplant well. I can't speak to that without seeing them, but Leylands are still a viable option, okay? We brought gold ones in this year. The key is to care for them, plant them properly, maintain them till they get acclimated, and then for God's sake, turn the irrigation off, okay? After they get acclimated. Irrigation is like hedge trimmers. It causes a lot of problems. After a plant establishes, so you do this beautiful, diverse screening planting design at your home, you're going to care for those plants for the first 2 years with proper watering. You're going to be very diligent in the first year. You're going to water them twice a week, every week, right through the summer and into the fall. You're going to, when you water, you're going to water like you mean it. I always recommend a hose, a garden hose. Just saturate them, okay? 10, 15 gallons at a time. Let them dry out in between waterings. And you do that up till October, you're almost done with watering. The only other time you have to water is the following summer when they're not quite self-sufficient. You're going to water once or twice a month, okay? After that second fall, they're done. They're on their own. They're going to self-sustain and take care of themselves better than you can. All right? Now, the exception to that is if we get a drought. So that's really when irrigation could be beneficial. But if you're watering established trees every day, every other day, twice a week for 20 to 30 minutes, you're only doing harm to them, okay? You're keeping them wet when they should be drying out. So give some thought to that at your homes, okay? I'm sure all of you are going to have questions on that. So I'll field them as they come. So, yes?
Trees that were planted last summer that were watered,
Uh-huh.
when should they start being watered?
Again, this year? Yeah, so when we stop getting rainfall, so there's plenty of soil moisture right now. So this summer, what I would recommend is you just do them once or twice a month. But like you mean it, okay? I know you guys are doing that. So irrigation usually can't put enough water on newly planted trees. Some can, so, oh, but I have soakers. I'm like, okay, are you running them for hours? Okay? Some of the new systems actually, with the app and everything, they can adjust that and do it. So there are some, but they're expensive as can be. If I'm spending $2,000-$3,000 on trees, I'm hand watering them because I want to make sure they are taken care of. So my rule is I only plant in my house what I can water in an evening. Okay? So one night a week or 2 nights a week I take time to water my new plantings. Okay? Real quick story on soaker hoses. Front foundation planting, beautiful. I'm like, you like it? Yeah, great. Pay me. They paid me. We put the soaker hoses in. You have to watch them. You have to make sure they're working. Okay? They're all made in China, inexpensively. This one property, half the hose worked, half didn't. So half the planting died because nobody was watching. Okay? If you're going to spend this kind of money on trees and shrubs, you have to pay attention. Okay? So the first summer is when most of them die because the demand, it's tough. Like I don't like the summer. So if plants aren't getting cared for in the summer and you lose, that's when you tend to lose them. So that's when you have to be most diligent, okay, on your watering. So I think I talked about that enough. If anybody has questions, That's why I'm on Earth, is to talk about watering. So, okay? Somebody give me a scenario on planting, something different. Anybody? Anybody trying to screen anything from their neighbors? How about fences? Anybody want to try and have a big new stockade fence to keep the deer out?
No, we just want to screen a fence.
You want to make the soil less obvious,
Yeah.
right? And how big is the fence?
I think 6 feet.
6 feet, right? Like stockade type, so you can't see. By the way, the stockades seem to work for deer, right? So deer can jump over 6 foot pretty readily. They can't go over 8 foot, but they will not jump over something where they can't see the other side. So stockade fencing is becoming very popular, and to me, I don't like the way they look, but they're, you know what? You have to have them. Deer fencing in Westchester County is like wires to a height of 8 foot. Okay. I'm not sure what's going to happen here, but the stockade fences are very common now. In fact, we're getting a lot of people coming in just trying to solve it. Is it in the sun or in the shade?
I think shade. Most
You get 4 hours of sunlight, 5, 6,
maybe 3.
maybe 2, 3
3,
hours.
yeah.
Okay, right. So 6 hours of sun is full sun. So when you're looking at your yard after this, try to evaluate how many hours of sunlight you get. If you're getting 2 to 4, that's part sun. If you get 4 to 6, one of them is part shade, part sun, and the last one, okay? But 4 to 6 hours, you can pretty much plant anything, okay? Trees and shrub wise. Perennials, you still have to be very cognizant of sunlight, okay? But 6 hours of sun is full sun. You literally can plant almost anything, okay? And the ideal situation is to have a little bit of both, a mix of sun and shade. So what I would recommend on there is Japanese holly, okay? That would give you some height. Nandina is a very pretty ornamental shrub, okay? It's also called false bamboo. It's not bamboo, it's false bamboo. There is a bamboo, a clumping bamboo that will not spread. You're allowed to plant it. It's a very leafy plant, very different texture, right? And that could work if you like it. I'm not very fond of it. I don't recommend it a lot, but some people do, and it's a good option. Mahonia. So we are now in the process of receiving some large Mahonia. Okay, Oregon grape is the other name for it. It's very pretty flower late in the summer. Okay. If you have 2 to 3 hours of sunlight, you can still plant hydrangeas. Okay, the big leaf hydrangeas. So big leaf hydrangeas are the blue flower. All right. So a lot of us tend to plant them in full sun, and then in the summer they kind of wither a little bit. They don't care for that. They actually, in their natural habitat in Asia, they are an understory plant. They have some shade through the day. As long as you have enough sun to stimulate flowering, they're a beautiful plant. Okay? So I would say if you can kind of do a grouping of something, so you want to have evergreens there because you want some winter interest, right? That's really the role of the evergreen, is to have that year-round interest so it doesn't look dead. We've all seen gardens that are just void of any interest January, February into March, right? And then see what kind of flowering shrubs we can mix in with them, right? So you're not looking really for screening, you're just trying to soften something that's a little bit glaring. And the sun will come off of that white PVC like a mirror, very much so. Yes?
What about camellias for
That's a great option, right? And I
Something really big.
still haven't conditioned myself. Camellias do great on Long Island. It's an evergreen that flowers. So we have a display of them out front. I'm still waiting on a lot of others that are bigger. Camellias are really, thank you very much. That's a big help. But they're a really nice shrub to use as long as they're not going into full sun. So you may want to look at camellias. Now camellias get big. They're not easy to get in large sizes, okay? And they're very pricey when they get big. But if you can be patient, right, and let them evolve and mature, I think you'd be very happy with them. There are two types of camellias. Some that bloom early spring, like now, right? Our camellias on Long Island are going to bloom in the next couple weeks. And there are some that bloom in the fall, like towards the Thanksgiving holiday, okay? So we have both, okay? So camellias are a really nice option. The rhododendrons, andromedas, all the ericaceous plants. So you know, shade does not mean you're limited in diversification. There are a lot of options out there. You just have to open your mind and be receptive to them. So, you know, one of the things I did, one of the messages I wanted to give you guys today is, you know, don't just go to the plants you're comfortable with, right? That's a very common occurrence here. So it's like, where are the hosta? I'm like, well, they're over here. Why are you using hosta? Right? People hate me when I do that, right? And because hosta is deer fodder. But I'm like, are they doing it for the same reason, or are they just, everybody buys hostas, right? Because they know it. They grew up with them. They're easy to grow. Now they have more than they ever wanted, right? Because you have to divide them and stuff like that. But anyway, there are lots of options in the shade, okay? Yes?
Question, for fruit trees as part of a, what's the opposite of
Monoculture, so a diverse planting.
diverse? Yeah.
Anything except the
We
monoculture.
have a very diverse planted backyard that we've just moved into, but there are some spots that I'd like to fill in, and I prefer if it was something we could eat too.
Yeah.
So what? One of the things we worry about is very invasive roots that can mess up the pool or your foundation or things like that.
Okay.
What fruit trees have polite root systems that you don't have to live in terror of?
Okay.
And septic tanks or whatever, you know.
So, you know what? That's the third time I've had that question today.
Well,
About the
I'm not
roots.
here.
No, about roots, okay? Doing damage to a new structure, okay? So it's a very common question. It's a very common concern. So you guys know how tree roots grow, right? Many of you? Or, so 90% of the roots,
Go down.
90% of the roots are in the top 12 inches of the soil, okay? So they do not grow like that. They don't grow like a carrot, okay? So they grow radially, all right? So that's why you're asking, because they're gonna grow out of that location and go towards your pool. So have you ever seen a sidewalk get heaved by a street tree? So that's how they do damage. So as they grow incrementally each year, like if they're next to a sidewalk, they can lift that slab, okay? If they're growing towards your pool in this manner, when they get to that, they're going to deflect. There's nothing here for them to want. They're not going to try to go through that footing of the pool, okay? They're going to deflect off, and then they're going to come out from there, okay? So unless that tree is right next to the pool, think about that oak that lift the slab. It's because it's right next to the buttress roots. So the buttress is that flare at the bottom, and that grows incrementally, like that much a year. But over 20 years, it'll lift cement, but it's not going to do damage to your pool. It has no desire to go there. And unless we're there for 100 years, and unless you're planting, like, if this is your pool and you're planting here,
Let the grandkids worry.
probably not a good idea to plant this close to a pool. But it's highly unlikely the roots would do any damage. Okay? Yeah.
A river birch or a willow?
Okay. So
Would it go towards-
river birch and willows have very aggressive roots. Have you had trouble with them, or?
No, I'm just thinking they like water. So
Yeah.
if there's a
So
pool-
they can. There's reports of them getting into septic drains and things like that. So it's a viable concern. You may want to keep them away from septic systems. I've only been told about them. I've never seen it, but it's an expensive problem if it does occur. So river birch and willows, they're wet site tolerant plants. So their mode of survival is to get as many roots out as possible and get them out as far as possible. Because if you think about it, willows are one of the species that always get damaged in a storm. They tend to fall over because in wet site the soil isn't as durable. Okay, it gives way very easily, and that's why when you have that big lever and the wind catches it, they're like a fulcrum up there, and they'll rip the roots. So be prudent about planting wet site tolerant plants, river birch and willows, near septic systems. Okay, so pipes now in our ground are more steel. They're not that terracotta clay. So any damage that happens from tree roots, it's usually with old pipes. Okay, does that help anybody? Okay. Yes.
Okay, one more fruit tree question.
Yeah. And fruit trees, by the way, are a good option for you. Fruit trees are high maintenance, okay? And if you're growing for fruit, you have to do some treatments on them for insects and for diseases primarily, okay? But you can allow them to get taller. Actually, apple trees will get quite large if you let them. But if you're growing apples for fruit, you tend to prune them in a manner that keeps them at head level. Okay?
This is a front yard question. We have, I think, like 3 septic tanks. Septic and the overflow.
Okay.
And then right towards the curb is a little flower bed where I want to put a fruit tree.
Okay.
But I'm worried about the septic tanks.
No, don't be. Okay? 90% of the roots are in the top 12 inches. They don't grow down. Like the taproot is proverbial. Okay? Like there are very few trees with a taproot. Okay? But you really shouldn't worry about
Even
that.
if the label says it grows 40 to 60 feet tall, whatever.
Doesn't matter how big it gets there, right?
I
It's
just
where
assumed
the
it meant
roots are
long
going
roots
to
if it
grow.
grows tall.
So roots grow in a mat, miles and miles of root. On a big tree, like on a maple or an oak tree that's 40 foot tall, probably have 5-10 miles of root system. That's a guess, by the way. But it's just so dense, right? You have the structural roots coming out, and then they taper down until the roots are actually like a piece of thread. And those really small ones are what do the absorption, okay? And then they grow, okay? But they're not going to go down. So roots need oxygen, all right? So, you know, like the old, like don't put mulch on top of your tree. Why? Because it suffocates it, right? So mulch year after year after year decomposes until you get layers of soil. So I see it very often where a garden comes up to this height, right? Like half the table height. But the grade is right here. Like I have to step up into the garden. It wasn't designed that way. It happened because mulch had been piled up year after year after year. It really needs to come out. So with all that layering, each year there's a little less oxygen getting to the roots. Okay? Little less oxygen, little less root development, more insects, more pest problems. And that's how the decline begins. So that's why you have to be prudent with your mulch. And that's also why it's not going to impact your hardscapes or your structure. Okay? All right?
Sorry,
Go ahead.
I use shredded leaves instead of mulch.
Say it again, I'm sorry.
I use shredded leaves instead
Great.
of mulch. Is that an issue also?
No, not at all. No, they decompose, right? And you put them in, and then by spring, there really is nothing there, right? Okay. So there's no problem with them as long as it doesn't pile up and suffocate the root system. So there's nothing wrong with mulch. But if you're putting it on year after year after year, it is doing damage to your plants, okay? So it's a good idea to pull that back away, especially away from the stem of the plants. Okay, so if you have a multi-stem plant, you got to keep it away from the base. And if you have a single stem tree, you have to keep it off the buttress roots. The buttress of every tree should always be above grade. I dig some out that are 2 feet down, you know? And so they need oxygen to survive. So you can suffocate a tree, Okay? Yes, ma'am.
The landscapers are during the fall are blowing all the leaves into the tree areas.
Uh-huh.
Is that good?
That's great. That's really good. Actually, I would encourage everybody to do that. Like, it's so crazy to take leaves off our property. So you have some wooded areas. You're talking about the one property in Huntington Bay, right? Yeah, like put them in there. That's what I do.
Yeah.
Right? I just put them right into the side of the bed, and like, I don't even think they damage the lawn, to be honest with you. But it does look unsightly, right?
Yes.
So if you're in a neighborhood, you kind of owe it to your neighbors to kind of keep your yard clean. But
Underneath the trees and all.
underneath the trees, it decomposes. For some, nature takes care of that, right? Like, why do the woods never get that problem? Because the leaves decompose and they go right into the soil, and they don't get that layer. We're using shredded hardwood mulch, right? So it's like a lot more substance to it. So as it decomposes and becomes soil, it creates that layering. Leaves, like if you see out east, like I drive by, they have piles of leaves, like in November, you know? And they're like 20 foot tall. Then by spring, they're like 3 foot tall, you know? Like that's how much they decompose. So nature is brilliant, you know, and it knows what to do. So there's nothing wrong with putting your leaves from the lawn areas into the wooded area. They'll figure it out, okay?
We were talking about septic tanks and pools. What about gas lines? Somebody's about to put a miniature Japanese maple in the front corner of my yard, right where the gas line is.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Not if they're gonna hit the gas line.
How do you do that properly?
Well, okay, you guys know what 800 dig is, right? That's the line. So this is a good lesson, actually. So the utility companies have I'll get to you in a minute. The utility companies have a number you can call. It's like, hey, listen, I'm doing some landscaping. I need to get a mark out so I can plant without doing damage, right? My first planting job, we took out an electric line. It was horrible. Not here, when I worked for somebody else. So they will mark it. They might ask, are you planting in the front, planting in the back? So that definitely should be marked out before they dig. If you hire me or someone to plant for you and you think we're near a utility, it's better for you guys to call, for homeowners to call. They will accommodate you immediately. If I call as a contractor, they bleed me to death. I'm on the phone for an hour, I gotta show proof of insurance, like it's crazy. So I always ask our customers to handle that if we think we're gonna be near that, okay? So, but you should be aware of that, right? Like if you're digging for yourself, you should know where the telephone line, like the lines are going in, okay? All right. Yes, sir.
You know, what about the weed fabric stuff?
Okay. All right. So let me just ask one question, because I like questions, right? Did I touch on screening enough for you guys? I mean, so I'll come back to it in a second, but the weed fabric I don't use it. I usually talk people out of it. We have it in case you want it for something, so just stay with me, right? So you have this nice new area that you're gonna plant. And you're like, man, I do not wanna do that weeding. So you put a weed barrier down, and then you plant, or you cut around the plants and stuff, right? So then you have very few weeds that first year, but then nature happens and the weed seeds blow in from all the surrounding neighbors and from your property, and they land on top of that weed fabric. Well, they find a way to get established. They will get their roots, not necessarily through that, but in the mulch that's on top of it, they will reroot themselves. So in year 2, you tend to have weeds again. So that's why, like in some cases, it may be perfect for what you're trying to do. It will suppress a lot of weeds. It also suppresses moisture getting through. Not a lot, not entirely, not to a point where it kills it, but in those first 2 years of a new plant, you really want it to make sure it's getting enough water. So the fabrics are very highly developed, right? They're porous. The stuff's gonna get through it, but you will get weeds over time, because you're putting mulch on top of it, right? So that's
I'm more worried if it's going to hurt the shrubs or the trees.
I don't like them, right? Because I don't think it's not a natural condition, right? So I always believe try to replicate nature, and you'll be better off, right? So, but will it kill it? No. Maybe you have to add a little more water, you know. So, yes, ma'am.
A few years ago, I bought a beautiful Alberta peach tree from you and had your person install it, and everything was beautiful. It even came with lots of peaches on it and so forth. I think it was the squirrels ate every last one of them while they were still green, and the same for another peach tree that I had from like Home Depot.
Yeah.
And it was just, there was no hope. It happened like 2 years in a row.
Yeah.
And I wanted to purchase a couple of different types of fruit trees, and we have a lot of squirrels. Is there any hope?
Yes, you can do netting. Okay, so squirrels and birds will go after your fruit. So I lost my apple crop for the first time. Year before I had a bumper crop. Okay. I started feeding birds more, maybe, right? Got more birds, more squirrels.
They're shaking
So,
you down. You gotta
yeah.
pay the big.
There is no easy solution. So we have netting that's like 60 by 60. You can create a framework, put the netting over, tuck it down hard into the ground so the squirrels can't get under.
So like a whole tent?
Yeah. So the other thing is to have a lot of activity around the trees as the fruit is maturing, you know, just having a lot of activity. So I don't know what the easy solution is for that. Like wind spinners, you know, reflectors, things like that.
Terriers.
Yeah. So, but there's no easy solution for that. And I'll take those other types of questions a little bit, okay?
Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's totally fine. I just wanted to get back to screening. So, did I open anybody's eyes to diversity? Okay? Because it's really just a very basic principle of horticulture. And I have staff ready. If anybody wants to look at trees, we're going to have plenty of people in the yard. So I gave you some notes. It's not the end and be all on that, but these are trees that we're using successfully. And I use the term manageable or unmanageable. A tree is either manageable, meaning you can prune it, contain it, or it's not, right? There are some plants like the rhododendrons and stuff, you really can't prune them enough to contain them. You have to be willing to let them grow. But proper planting is still very important as well. So if there were a simple formula for everybody to use, I promise I would give it to you. It's just everybody's planting is going to be unique, what you're trying to hide and what you want to accomplish. And those are how we get our questions. So those are the things we're going to be asking you. So think about how much height you want, you know, spacing. Just let me touch on that real quickly. So people plant skip laurels 3 foot apart. Well, you're buying 20% too many, okay? Give them room to grow. So a green giant arborvitae, 8 foot apart. So the branches are here, right? Planted there and the branches come to here. This year they're gonna be here. Next year they're gonna be here, okay? By the 3rd year, they're right in the middle. That's happening over here. The trees are knitting together. 1st year sleep, 2nd year creep, 3rd year leap. Trees will transform in that 3rd year. You're gonna be like, son of a gun, Conrad was right. Okay? Have a good day and let us know how we can help you guys with your trees. Okay?